After having taken stock of the religious symbols and concepts featured in Final Fantasy XV, I would like to complete my analysis by discussing the theme of the game as a whole. As one might expect, this theme draws heavily upon the symbols and concepts that the game chose to include. But FF15 is not primarily a game about religion, even if many of its symbols and concepts are derived from that realm. Rather, FF15 chooses to focus on a more universal question: what defines a mature human being? Any story that seeks to portray the attainment of maturity must, by necessity, begin with a demonstration of traits which are notably immature. In Noctis' case, immaturity is suggested primarily by his rejection of anything a child might seek to avoid. First, Noct is a picky eater who retains a childish dislike of vegetables. Second, Noct hates mornings and prefers to sleep in. Third, and most obviously, Noct is unable to function independently. While he lived in his own apartment as a teenager, it's clear that he couldn't have managed it without Ignis' help, since several of his attempts at adulting proved disastrous. Finally, whenever Noct is confronted with an uncomfortable truth, his instinct is to distract himself from it however he can. Generally then, Noct presents himself as a boy who is not yet ready to become a man, and who, perhaps, would much prefer not to do so at all if given the choice. The initial conceit of Final Fantasy XV's road trip, traveling to a foreign land to seal a political marriage with a childhood friend, might at first glance appear alien to the modern experience of maturity. The unusual circumstances, however, provide a unique opportunity to explore maturity as a concept. What the political marriage accomplishes is, effectively, a separation between Noct's feelings towards Luna and Noct's feelings towards marrying Luna. Because the wedding isn't Noct's choice, he can feel ambivalent about it without consequently feeling ambivalent towards Luna. And it's the wedding, connoting as it does acceptance of responsibility and unconditional self-gift, that evokes the concept of maturity. As such, when Noct is shown to have feelings toward Luna, they're childish and immature. Luna, too, associates the relationship with the safety and familiarity of childhood. And when the two of them do express a desire to be married, it's always in the context of their greater responsibilities. Noct desires that the wedding will serve as a symbol of peace. Luna desires that marriage will serve as a source of comfort in the face of her even heavier burden as Oracle. In the end, their wedding serves not so much as an expression of their personal feelings towards each other, but as a consummation of their growth into mature individuals. It is only after the two of them prove willing to lay down their lives for others that they attain marital bliss. The second prong of Final Fantasy XV's reflection on maturity appears at the end of Chapter 1. Insomnia falls, Noct's father Regis is killed, and Noct is called upon to take the mantle of king. Acting as the ruler of a nation might not be a common experience of maturity, but inheriting a leadership role from a parent is. And interestingly, Noct was never actually expected to rule Lucis. Instead, FF15's concept of kingship focuses on the burden of responsibility and the obligation to prioritize the needs of others. Regis leaves little doubt in the matter when he says, "A king pushes onward always, accepting the consequences and never looking back." As one might expect, Noct is just as ambivalent about his responsibility as king as he is about his marriage. In fact, his growth as a person is shown primarily through his willingness to accept this responsibility in the face of growing costs. Noct's feelings towards the ring provide a particularly pointed illustration of this dynamic, as he initially refuses to put it on, but eventually chooses to wear it despite the suffering that entails. In the end, Noct's ascension to the throne, much like his marriage, is inextricable from his willingness to lay down his life for others. The true king, the truly mature leader, proves his kingship by accepting the consequences of his ancestors' sins, pushing onward to restore the world ruined by House Kylum through his own self-sacrificial love, and never looking back. It is not unusual, of course, for stories to associate marriage and leadership with maturity. Martyrdom, in contrast, is not as common in modern storytelling. And yet, Final Fantasy XV all but identifies it with these two standard vocations of mature adults. Essentially, FF15 seems to consider martyrdom, the willingness to lay down one's life for a transcendent cause, to be a prerequisite to true maturity. Martyrdom serves to ground the game's worldview. The defining moment of Noctis' life is neither a wedding nor a coronation, but a supremely selfless act of self-sacrifice. This, I would argue, is where the game differentiates itself from standard coming-of-age stories. And Noctis isn't the only character to whom this applies. Virtually every non-villain with an arc worth speaking of is likewise called to lay down their lives to some extent. When Aranea tells Prompto, "Your life isn't yours to live," her words convey one of FF15's primary lessons. Noctis does, however, provide a particularly nuanced portrayal of martyrdom, insofar as his strength is derived from the same transcendent cause for which he gives his life. The power of providence is not his own, and even his resolve to make the sacrifice necessary to use it arises under the influence of a divine other. And while Noctis continues to struggle with his approaching death to the very end, when the time comes, he finds the strength he needs to lay down his life and his love for his family and friends. Even more remarkably, the way in which Final Fantasy XV portrays martyrdom ensures that its understanding of maturity possesses a distinctly Christian flavor. If the game merely managed to avoid incoherence or even inconsistency in its use of Christian symbolism, the overwhelming quantity of that symbolism might remain a mere curiosity. But the relationship between maturity and Christ-likeness could not be more clear in the case of Noctis. It is in the submission of his will that Noctis confirms that he is no longer a child, in suffering that he receives the power to banish the darkness, and in his sacrificial death that he becomes the king and bridegroom he is meant to be. In the end, the fully realized Noctis stands as a shining exemplar of agape, the unconditional divine love that wills the good of the other at any cost. Given FF15's primary objective of demonstrating the nature of maturity, then, its decision to have Noctis serve as a Christ figure has some interesting implications. At the very least, Noctis' role as Christ figure does not function as an unattainable ideal. Rather, the game suggests that participation in such redemptive suffering is critical to the attainment of true maturity, and to that end, it insists that the player participate in Noctis' sacrifice. In the end, Noctis' development does not serve to transcend the player so much as to draw the player into Noctis' experience of willing submission.
Thank you.
Overall, then, Final Fantasy XV's answer to the question, what defines a mature human being, appears to be a willingness to live for others rather than oneself, even when suffering is inevitable. The three core concepts of marriage, kingship, and martyrdom function as exemplars of the roles by which one might offer such sacrificial service. And, in the end, it's this identification of self-sacrifice with maturity that provides the backbone, not just of FF15's symbolic schema, but also of the game as a whole.